Thanks for checking out the BoshNRoll channel. If you want to see me play your deck, hang out with me in the amazing BoshNRoll community in Discord, access to my lists and sideboard guides before tournaments, book an individual coaching session, or just generally want to support what's going on here, check out the Patreon and YouTube membership options. For the finest Magic the Gathering apparel on the market, use code BoshNRoll for 10% off your order at coalesceapparel.shop. Moxfield.com is the easiest way to build a Magic deck online. If you want to play what I'm playing, use my affiliate link to support the channel while you shop for cards at tcgplayer.com and play any deck anytime on Magic Online with a cardhoarder.com loan account. Thanks for being here. Let's go play some Magic. Welcome back for another video tournament report. This one is for the cEDH tournament Okotoberfest run by Monarch Media. That was held over the weekend of November 19th and the 20th, 2022. And I won. I won the whole thing. First place, hoisted the trophy at the end. And people have been asking me to do one of these. And of course I'm going to. There I am with the championship playmat. The deck I played was Tymna Kraum Blue Farm. Tymna the Weaver and Kraum Ludovic's Opus are the commanders. And if you're not entrenched in cEDH and what Blue Farm means, this is basically a mid-range control deck that wins with Ad Nauseam or Underworld Breach at some point. It can go fast. It is a deck with Dark Ritual, Cabal Ritual, Simian Spirit Guide, City of Traders, Ancient Tomb, Grim Monolith, tons of fast mana in this deck for a quick Ad Nauseam. It plays all the most efficient tutors, Vampiric, Imperial Seal, Demonic Tutor, Diabolic Intent. But it can also just sit back and draw cards and counter spells, make sure you don't die, and build up advantage over time. And that's what I like about this deck. It's not a dedicated Turbo Naz deck, but it's also not a dedicated control deck. It's something in between, and everybody at the table needs to respect both halves at all times. It really rewards picking your spots and knowing what your game plan is. And if you've ever watched any of my content before, you know that's exactly what I'm about in a Magic tournament. I build for the floor, not for the ceiling. I'm not thinking about my most busted turn 1. I'm thinking about how to make it to turn 5 the most often. The highest number of games where I don't just die and I get to keep playing. And that's all I want in life. Blue Farm offers that. I'll dig into the specifics of my list later. In part 2 of this video, I'm going to get Matt Sperling on the call. Matt recently jumped into cEDH a couple months ago, and he jumped onto Blue Farm at my recommendation. I believe he started with something very close to my list, and he made a bunch of really bold innovations, and we talked about it leading up to this tournament, and I think our lists were like 11 cards different, and I adopted 4 or 5 of the things he was doing and kept the other half that I was doing. The collaborative effort between, obviously, the established cEDH community, neither of us thought of Blue Farm. This archetype fully existed, fully formed, long before I started playing cEDH. But we have been working on it, tuning on it, and I'm really happy with where the list is right now. We'll dig into the specifics of the list in the second half for the people who are interested in that part of it. This part will just be my tournament report. As usual, we're just going to stroll through my Twitter feed from the weekend, and I will do my best to recount each round as it happened. This was my first ever cEDH tournament. I've been playing the format for about a year and a half, but not been able to make it out to an organized tournament, and I didn't really know what to expect. I've played hundreds, thousands probably, of Magic tournaments in my life, but never in EDH, never multiplayer, never free-for-all multiplayer. I've played some Two-Headed Giant at pre-release and stuff, but never really like this. And I was really interested to see how things like time in the round and table politics played out, both of which are concerns of mine if there's more than 2 players at the table. The structure of the tournament was 7 rounds of Swiss over 2 days. It was supposed to be 6 rounds day 1, and then 1 round on day 2, and then the cut to the elimination rounds. It ended up, for time purposes, being 5 rounds day 1, then 2 rounds day 2, and then the elimination rounds, but this was the original plan. The top cut is really interesting. It was a cut to top 40, right? 40. And the top 8 of those top 40 got a bye in the quarterfinals, leaving 32 players, which is 8 pods. And then the winner of each of those 8 pods joined the top 8 who got the bye into the top 16. So we had 16 players making up 4 pods. And then that was the semifinal. And then the winner of those 4 pods went to the final, which was a 4-person pod. Really cool structure. Took my tournament Swiss round brain a little bit to wrap around how this was all going to work. And as we'll see later, I didn't quite understand the tournament math the whole way through. You also get 5 points for winning a pod, 1 point for a draw, and 0 for a loss. 5 points for winning a pod, really interesting compared to 3 points in a normal Swiss tournament. I'm not sure how much that actually matters. It makes 1 win worth more than 3 draws, which I think it should be. I don't know, but seems to make sense. People who've spent way more effort on this than me came to these numbers, and they seem to work out at the end. But that was the structure of the tournament. Tymna, Kraum, of course, were my commanders. The event was held in Center City, Philadelphia, which is a place that I have not been able to hang out since pre-COVID times. I spent my entire tournament Magic career being there, probably 7 to 10 times a year. And the Reading Terminal Market's right across the street from the Philadelphia Convention Center. And I was really glad to revisit some of my food. There will be food pics in this tournament report. My traditional Saturday breakfast at a Magic tournament is from Miller's Swiss. They make what are basically Hot Pockets, but they're made of delicious homemade pretzels. And I got some steak, egg, and cheese pretzels for breakfast. So good. Glad I could make that happen. Pro tip, you have to go to Miller's on Saturday because on Sunday, all of the Amish and Amish adjacent vendors are not there. They don't work on Sundays. If you want Miller's, you got to get it early. In the actual tournament, I won pod number 1. I was in the first seat. And it's pretty cool. The tournament software determines your turn order, so there's no rolling dice once you get there. You know exactly where to sit when you arrive at the table. I really appreciate that. I was on Tymna, Kraum. Second position was on Zur. Third position was Tymna. And fourth position was Tameshi. Notable things that happened in this game. I had a turn 1 Ragavan, and when it came back around to my turn, Zur had mana open, Tymna had a blocker, and Tameshi was tapped out with nothing. So I attacked Tameshi with Ragavan, and in proper EDH fashion, I got complaints about my attack on the first attack of the game. Tameshi was immediately like, what? Doesn't Zur have better things? I was like, I don't know. You probably have fast mana, don't you? And then Ragavan connected and flipped Mox Opal. Immediately paid for that decision. So, aced it, Tameshi. Then Tymna is a non-blue deck. They were dropping out some Stax Bears. There was an Archon of Emuria. There was some other stuff really messing with the rest of the table. The rest of us are combo decks. I had a mid-game Fire Covenant. I brain farted there. I almost said Demonic Consultation. Fire Covenant that swept up all of Tymna creatures. And Zur and Tameshi were happy to let it resolve because they're also combo decks. And that bought me time to draw some cards. And then in the end game, I had an end of turn Cyclonic Rift at the end of Tameshi's turn. Then I untapped and won. Tameshi was politicking pretty hard in like kind of a priority manipulation way, which I am not saying is incorrect. It's just part of playing a 4-player game and this was a round 1 introduction to it. Tameshi, when it was about to be his priority, he'd verify with the other player before him. He'd be like, are you sure you don't have anything? And then when it was his priority, he'd be talking to me like, do you have anything? And I was like, you have priority, homie. I don't know. Do something. And that really came to a point when Zur made a move. They had 6 mana available and cast Silence. In cEDH, 5 is a magic number. It means ad nauseum. 5 mana out of a black deck. Never trust it. Silence was on the stack. Priority passed through Tymna. Then Tameshi was like, do you have anything? And I was like, it's your priority. Do you have anything? And he was just like, I'll pass priority. And then I had to counter the Silence, which led to a counter war that Tameshi countered the counter on Silence and then also countered the ad nause. So they did have multiple pieces of interaction, and by passing there, they did flush out my counter spell as well. which is part of playing a multi-person table. But if I just said, okay, silence resolves, we would have lost, and they would have died with 2 counterspells in hand. Kind of reckless, but it ended up working out best for everyone. And I ended up winning the game. Good stuff. Table 2, I was in 3rd seat. First seat was Tivit. Second seat, Luris, then me, and then Tymna Thrasios. And I messed up this game by forgetting that there were 2 other people at the table. I was really worried about Tymna Thrasios, and they were trying to resolve a Ranger Captain of Eos. That's the 3-drop that can silence. You can sacrifice it to silence all your opponents. And I both didn't want that thing in play on my turn, and I didn't want it in play on their turn, because I can't win through it, and I can't stop them from winning through it either. So I fought over it, forgetting that there are 2 artifact-based combo decks in between me and them. And Luris ended up winning the game because I had no interaction. I had spent my counterspell on Ranger Cap, and Ranger Cap was Tymna Thrasios' interaction to stop Luris. And I lost us that pod. I handed it to Luris because I was playing 1v1 in a seat where playing 1v1 didn't matter. If I was next, like if they were 3rd and I was 4th, then fighting over that thing makes sense because I get a turn before anyone else does. But I just handed it to the other table. Important lesson learned that you have 4 opponents, and one of your opponent's scary cards might not be meant for you. At this point, some folks in Discords that I was a member of started telling me how the tournament math works out, and 12 points should lock the elimination round. That's 2 wins, 2 draws over 7 rounds. And any more than that, or another win, 3 wins should make actual top 8. 12 points seem doable. I already had 5 at the end of round 2, and a lot of Magic still to play. But that was the general math that folks were working off of. There was a lunch break built into the tournament, which was kind of nice. It does make the day go longer, but also players are happier. Little pro and con to that. But got the Amish barbecue. Once again, they don't work on Sundays. Make sure you get there on Saturday if you want this, and I recommend it. In round 3, I was 4th position versus another Tymna Kraum, Tulane, and Tymna Thrasios. Tulane is a stacks combo deck. This is the first real heavy stacks deck I played against, especially backed by blue. And they were pretty scary. They played a lot of annoying things. Turn 1, the other Tymna Kraum player had turn 1 Rhystic Study on the play, just from first position, which is a complete nightmare for everybody. And then Tulane had turn 1 Deafening Silence. So already the other Tymna Kraum player is pulling way ahead on cards. Nobody can combo out under Deafening Silence, and 2 of us haven't even gotten a turn yet. Really tough from the start. Nobody could really do anything, and we could only cast 1 spell a turn. And Tulane played Overburden at one point, which is a 1 and a blue enchantment that whenever a non-token creature enters the battlefield, its controller returns a land they control with their owner's hand. So nobody could really get ahead on lands either. It was just a completely stalled board. But slowly over multiple turns, I set up Demonic Tutor for Grand Abolisher. This is white. Opponents can't play spells or activate abilities of creatures, lands, or whatever. There's some specific words that it can't stop, but there's one thing it doesn't stop that we're going to come up to shortly here. And I set up a line where from 2 mana and 2 treasures, I could cast Grand Abolisher. And I kind of was like, okay, here's my spell for the turn. Not that I'm doing anything, haha. And the table let Grand Abolisher resolve. And then I bounced one of my lands and replayed it from the Overburden. Then I used that land and a treasure to cast Thassa's Oracle, which they couldn't counter. And then I used my last treasure to cast Demonic Consultation, which is only 1 non-creature spell through the Deafening Silence. I had exactly enough mana through the Overburden, and Grand Abolisher was in play. Thought I had it. But the Tymna Kraum player had exactly 4 mana available and a legendary creature in play. They were able to channel Otawara and bounce my Grand Abolisher, then cast Swan Song on my Consult, and stuffed my what I thought was going to be a heroic win under heavy stacks. And they managed. There's one thing that can break that up, and it's Otawara, and they had it. And that brought me to the next really interesting decision I had to make with the tournament structure. I still got a Thassa's Oracle trigger, so I got to look at the top 2 cards in my deck and decide if I wanted to keep one there. The 2 cards that I saw were Ad Nauseam and Flusterstorm. There were 31 minutes on the clock, and I had to make a decision there if I was going to try to resolve this Ad Nauseam at some point in the next 31 minutes, or use Flusterstorm to make sure nobody did anything. And I kept the Flusterstorm, and we politicked our way. We played Archenemy just 3v1 around and around for the next 31 minutes, all making sure nobody else could win. And we ended up drawing the table. At the end of the game, Tymna Thrasios was making a big move. And basically, the other 3 players, we all had our hands face up. And we were all working together to play all 3 hands to make sure Tymna Thrasios couldn't win. And we did end up with a draw out of it. And I didn't want to draw, I wanted to win, but once my one real chance at victory got stuffed, it was cool to pivot onto that plan. Another thing that happened in this round was some of the players at the table, one of them was definitely big time casual, and he even said so himself, and I had to kind of remind them in the early turns that the round is timed. Let's, if we can chat, let's hang out, but also let's keep the game moving forward. There was at least one spot where everybody had set their cards down on the table and they were just talking about something else, not even game related. And I was kind of like, hey guys, we're on the clock here. And they did appreciate the gentle reminder. And if you are the person who sees the clock ticking away, don't be afraid to say something. Just don't be a jerk about it. And they did at the end. They were like, yeah, I don't play many tournaments. You're right. Thanks for keeping us on the rails with the clock and stuff. So they got it after like 4 or 5 turns, but I think I had to prompt the table a couple times in the first couple turn cycles to pay attention to the clock and keep the game moving. And we still ended up drawing. Good stuff. The next round, I was in first position versus Minskin Boo, Korvold, and Nezahal. This pod's really interesting because 2 of the players aren't playing blue at all, and one of them is only playing blue, which creates a totally different type of experience than when you're playing against Kraum and Thrasios decks. I assume lots of speed and stacks pieces out of Minskin Boo and Korvold, and I assume just tons of fast mana and counterspells out of Nezahal. My start was completely busted, though. I kept my first 7-card hand, and it had turn 1 Esper Sentinel and turn 2 Rhystic Study, and I ended up never even casting the Rhystic Study, just didn't need it. I drew Drannith Magistrate on turn 2, and I did Cavern on Human, uncounterable Drannith Magistrate. Then I drew Ranger Captain, uncounterable Ranger Captain, drew the Cavern, also a human. And then on my next turn, I popped the Ranger Captain and went off with a clean Ad Nauseam win. I just didn't cast a counterable spell for that entire game, and just shrugged off Nezahal, and I knew the non-blue decks weren't going to stop me anyway. So that was the cleanest, fastest win that I got in the entire tournament. This thing kept happening where the bot would pair us and we'd go to the table with one turn order in mind. And then if you looked a minute or 2 later, there would be a different turn order. And we were already seated for our match, ready to play. I think we'd even started mulliganing our hands. And a table next to us was like, hey, everybody check, the pairings are different. And we called a judge because the clock was running and we weren't sure what to do because we had already started. And the judge said, we can either keep these pairings, or if anybody objects to that, we can randomize new pairings, neither the original one nor the change, because obviously the incentive, like, I'm in first, obviously I want to keep these ones, and the person in fourth is likely to be like, anything's better than this, let's mix it up. But luckily the table was cool and they said, no, we've already started, let's just stay where we are. And I appreciate that. I did pay it forward later. That came up in some of my other matches where I wasn't first seat, and I just figured, it's already randomized once, let's just play it out. So I wouldn't fault anyone who from fourth position would have said, no, let's mix it back up. I get it. It's a tournament. Then in round 5, this is where the event had been running really long. There were some crazy judge call situations that ate up like 40, 50 minutes throughout the day, and we were an hour behind where we thought we were going to be. The TO put it to a vote, just show of hands in the room, who wants to play 2 rounds tomorrow, or who wants to just cut a whole round off the tournament and still play 1 tomorrow, but it's a 6-round event instead of a 7. and it was overwhelming that let's just play 2 rounds tomorrow and keep our 7. I was seat number 3 versus Karakushima, Malcolm Tana, and Florian. Karakushima is a deck that I know gets a crazy rap for how long it can take to combo off, how convoluted the lines are. And it was Scoots, a player I'm aware of from the internet, who I know is a strong player, and he was in first position. And I was against Florian, a commander I've never seen before, but I've seen Prosper and other Rakdos Turbo Naz decks. I figured it was something in that realm. I was glad they were in 4th position because that stuff is scary. Board got gummed up really hard early on. Malcolm Tana is a creature-based combo deck, and eventually I cast a Fire Covenant for 13, and it was divided in a lot of 1s, 2s, and 3s around the table. And it got deflecting swatted, which is something that I had never seen happen before, and totally works miserably for me. But my one saving grace is that the spell, if you change the targets, still needs the same number of targets, and the damage is still distributed in the same way. So my Kraum being a 4/4, the SWAT player couldn't move 4 1-point shots at little creatures, all at Kraum. You could only put 1 target on 1 target once you choose new targets. And Kraum was able to survive. I lost some other stuff. I lost like an opposition agent and some real good creatures. And Florian kept all his creatures. He was the SWAT player, but everybody else, the board did get pretty beat up by that. And I passed the turn into Florian, who was all gassed up after the Fire Covenant SWAT. And he tried to go off twice. The table, mostly Karakushima and Tymna Tana, fought, or not Tymna, Malcolm Tana fought over that. I really had nothing. Like, my hand was all engines and no interaction. And I was able to make a statement that I really enjoy making, which is after you lose a big counter war, you're just safe to make everyone else do everything for the next turn cycle. Like, I just said to everyone, if I had a counter spell, I would have countered the SWAT. And there it is. It's on the table. It's both true and completely believable. And they had to spend their hand stopping Florian from going off. And there was a fun political thing that happened here where Karakushima showed the other 2 players, me and Malcolm, that he had Flusterstorm in hand. He was like, I got this if anyone else can like make this relevant, because there was enough mana to pay for Flusterstorm at the time. And I couldn't help with the Flusterstorm, but because we were all working together against Florian right now, I was able to know that Scoots only had Flusterstorm going into my combo turn. Yeah, they just went empty. I knew there was a Flusterstorm and nothing else when it got back around to my turn. I cast an end step Intuition just to flush out the Flusterstorm. I had the whole win in my hand anyway, but either Flusterstorm's out of the hand and I'm totally free, or Intuition resolves and I get to gas up in different ways and just punch through the Flusterstorm. It was just a fun multi-layer politicking game the whole way through that I ended up winning 16 points. And 16 points, like I talked about, we were pretty sure 12 points was locked for top 40, 16 points already way ahead of that. And I was able to use day 2 just to try to bash for that top 8 buy round after the elimination rounds. Also realized at the end of the day that I was wearing my Karakushima shirt, or my Sakashima the Imposter shirt. I'm actually wearing it right now too. I must like the shirt. Laundry day. I was wearing that when I was facing down Sakashima. And if you want this, check out coalesceapparel.shop. Use code BoshNRoll for 10% off your order. #sponsored. Coalesce Apparel's great. Day 2 started with a Reuben from Herschel's. Recently, Jim from the Commander Rules Committee and also the Spike Feeders made a post about what's the perfect breakfast sandwich. And I was like, it's literally just a Reuben. And to put my money where my mouth is, I went to Herschel's first thing in the morning. It was like 9 in the morning. And the cooks, they hate breakfast. That's like a thing among cooks, if you didn't know that. And a bunch of people were ordering like egg and bagel stuff. And I could see their eyes rolling and they were like miserable about it. And I ordered just corned beef Reuben. And I got like a hell yeah, we could do that. And then they just excitedly started making my sandwich. Breakfast Reuben achieved. Also one of my food goals for the weekend at the Reading Terminal Market. Round 6, first round of day 2, I was on camera. This match can be found in the Monarch Media VODs. This one went on for a long time. The Tevesh Dargo, another Rakdos combo deck, was in first seat. Bruce Thrasios, played by Comedian, one of the better cEDH players in the world, was at the table, and then another Tymna Kraum deck. The Dargo player mulliganed to I think it was 4, just really put themselves out of it, went all in on a turn 1 Tevesh that I countered, and they were never really a player in that game. It might have been turn 2, actually, because I Fierce Guardianshipped it, and I must have had a commander in play to do that. But they made an early move on low cards, and they were just never really a player in that game. The Tymna Bruce player really dominated, just got their engine online, had turn 1 training grounds into Thrasios, found a Steedborn Muse, and were just really digging on cards. I managed to assemble Tymna, Kraum, maybe Rhystic Study. I forget all the details, but at some point in the game, I caught up to the early Thrasios, and we were both just rolled up on cards. And I made a mistake here that will circle back in the finals to be a lessons learned. I tried to make a move. I had 3 shots at it. My hand had Ad Nauseam, Breach, and Mnemonic Betrayal in it, and the mana to cast all of them. And I ended up casting all of them. They fended off all of them. And Storm was so high at the end of my turn, and it was all Tymna Bruce doing all the work. Just we were beating each other up across the table. And at the end of the turn, from last position in turn order after my turn, the other Tymna Kraum player just natural brain freezed Tymna Bruce, or Thrasios Bruce, milled the whole deck, and they just died on their draw step. And then they comboed off on their turn. And seats 2 and 4 beat each other into goo, while 1 never really played the game. And then 3 was just left standing to win when nobody else could do anything. And I could have just kept passing the turn, kept drawing cards. I had Kraum going, I had Tymna going. I was just really worried about Ian getting another turn and wanted to make a move on it. And I guess that worked insofar as Ian didn't really get another turn, but not in the way I wanted. The other Tymna Kraum player ended up winning this pod. And spoilers, Trevor is the name of the Tymna Kraum player. Ian, Trevor, and I are 3 of the final pod when we get to the finals. All 3 of us ended up doing pretty well in this tournament. And we had all sat at the same table before. We had all seen a bit of each other's decks and a bit of each other's play styles, and that'll come up later in the day. This was one of the most interesting hands I had on the day. This was my first 7, where keeping a 7 is delightful in Commander, but Cavern of Souls, which is in the deck meant to be on human, with 0 humans, but I do have Ragavan and Dockside Extortionist, both of which are pirates. So Cavern would have had 2 spells to cast, but from 4th position, I wasn't confident that Ragavan would connect with anything, and I really would need Rag to connect to get a treasure to get anything going here, because between Ragavan and Dockside, they both make treasures, but those would have been my only colored sources. Ancient Tomb Grim Monolith is the other mana in this hand. I don't know. This one was really close. I think I keep it in 1st or 2nd position, where Ragavan's more likely to get a connection through. But from 4th position, I just sent it.
You come here to level up at Magic. To level up as a software engineer, check out the new YouTube series Dev Better, hosted by the founder of 7 Factor Software and Magic player, Jeremy Duvall. 7 Factor's small teams of high-performing engineers build custom mobile apps, APIs, and highly scalable systems for Fortune 500 companies and ambitious startups with great ideas. If you'd like to hire 7 Factor, or maybe join their team, contact them through their website at 7factor.io. And don't forget to subscribe to 7 Factor's YouTube for every episode of Dev Better.
The final round, a couple of weird things happened. I was in 2nd position versus Thrasios Tevesh, Tymna Jeska, and Azizan, new Hazizan, not the original one, but the new one. I don't know the full name of that guy. The table offered a draw, but at 17 points, I thought I needed another win to make top 8. Or I was at 16 points. The 17 is when this table goes to a draw the hard way, if you can read ahead here. At 16 points, I thought I needed another win to make top 8, and we were already locked for top 40. Azizan and Brazios were also locked for the elimination rounds, but not necessarily top 8. But a weird thing is the Tymna Jessica player was paired up to us from 0, 3, and 3. They had 3 points to our 16. Each of us had 16, and they had 3, which the bot does its best to pair people based on who you haven't played. Like it does start with record first, but then it starts filtering by who hasn't played. It wants a fresh pot of 4 with no repeats as often as possible. And just 7 rounds into the tournament, a lot of people had played each other. And this is who the bot dug up for us to be at the table with, which was a little awkward because this person is clearly just there to play at 0, 3, and 3, and you're still in the tournament. You clearly just came to play games, and you're not actually trying to win the tournament anymore. And the 3 of us talking about a draw just sorries this person out of this round that they signed up to play. Also, just thinking about the demographic of individual who would show up with 3 draws, is I have 1 draw in this tournament, and it's because I played to it on purpose, just accidentally arriving at 3 draws. Maybe this is rude, no offense to the person, they were very nice, but commander is commander, and there's a commander mentality of just hang out, we're all playing, we're all having fun, like I'm checking my phone, whatever. Oh, is it my turn? Sure, I'll do some stuff. Extra banter that doesn't actually move the game state forward. And I suspected this might be a casual person who, in the lower bracket of the tournament, probably was playing against other more casual folks at a table of people playing for top 8. And I was not wrong. This person had like an extra thing to say about every card they played, like, this is a good start. I'll play a Mana Crypt. Instead of just like Mana Crypt, like adding 7 to 10 seconds onto every action they took just by chatting, which over a course of a game bleeds out a lot of the clock. And that just happened throughout the whole game. And we ended up drawing because we ran out of time. And I don't think I could have won this game anyway, but if this person had played faster, I would have had at least 2 more turns on the clock. It was just like a really awkward mix of incentives, even though they're very nice, and I'm not disparaging this person as a person in the tournament or a human being who exists in the world, but it's just really tough putting people with a lot on the line in a pod with someone with nothing on the line. And I know the TO submitted a bug report to his people who run the bot to say, like, this shouldn't happen. Like, we got to figure out something else to do this. Like, that was a really deep cut for that. Just kind of awkward. But, yeah, they offered the draw. I wanted to play because I want top 8. They both wanted to go get lunch, the Hazazon and Thrazios player. And to their credit, the Tymna Jessica player did say, I'll do whatever you all want. I don't really care. And I said, I want to play. So I did shoot my shot and say, we're all locked for top 40. I want to play for top 8. If you all want to draw into top 40 anyway, you're in with a loss. You could just concede to me and we all get what we want and you can go get lunch. I ran that. They didn't bite, but it made sense to me, obviously. Yeah, this round went all the way to time, and we played through all of the extra turns of time, and they all took a long time because there was a stack and all this other stuff going on. 110-minute round, and we ended up in the same spot where if I had just agreed to draw in the first place. 17 points, which resulted in me being in 7th place anyway. Congratulations on doing weird tournament math. I just didn't know what the top 8 cut was going to be, and it turned out that both me and the Tymna Tevesh player ended up in top 8 in 7th and 8th. Hazazon was in 9th on breakers. Tough beats, but it turns out I could have just got lunch and chilled out. So I got my bye in the quarterfinals. I was just chilling. And then a series of weird things happened. The elimination rounds are untimed because there's nothing you can do with a draw in an elimination round, and there was no sudden death or any sort of rules or policy in place if a round just went completely out of control. And one of the games, through both just the natural rollout of the strategies at the table and a number of judge calls that went long, and I think at the end there might have been some fishing going on where one player really started to call a judge on every little thing, trying to accumulate game rule violations and get someone else out of the game. Now, it seemed like it was not really Magic being played at some point, but that match took almost 3 hours, which is just, I was laying on the floor in the tournament hall. I cleared every quest for every game and app on my phone. I was just doom scrolling like crazy. I was, booting up Netflix. Just, oh my God, that took forever. And embedded within that, another weird thing happened where somebody who had already won their top 32 pod and made the top 16 realized they had to leave. So they told the TO, hey, I'm in top 16, but I have to leave. And the TO determined the solution to that was to refire their game with the 3 players who didn't have to leave. Then the winner of that 3-person game would make top 16 in their place. And they got away with it because this one top 32 match took so long that this whole other game was played all within the time of the other top 32 match. But I told the TO, I don't know about that decision, because what if the round was done and you just added a whole hour to the night by firing this secret side pod, this second chance pod, also necroing a bunch of people who had already been eliminated from the tournament for a second chance. And either way, you end up with a 3-person pod affecting the outcome of the tournament. Like whether it's a 3-person pod plays into top 16 or you just end up with a 3-person pod in top 16. I don't know, that's tough. And clearly Commander players have this really heavy need for integrity of pod, where a 4-person pod at any cost. Because when I went to the TO, I was just like, yeah, I don't know about that call. And I would like to clarify, I didn't go up to him just to complain. We were talking anyway, and I was like, what's up with this? And he was like, we really only had 2 options. Either they play again or we randomized it. And I was like, what about having a 3-person pod in top 16? And he was like, oh, that never occurred to me or the judge staff. And then another person, just another spectator nearby, was like, I would rather wait all night and get a clean 4-person pod in top 16 than have a 3-person pod. And yeah, I don't know if I agree with that. I don't know. It's a tough spot either way, but weird decision that ended up being completely unpunished because this second game started over an hour into the first game and then finished before the first game finished. Just, I don't know. I feel like there needs to be some sort of sudden death at some point or something. Just 2 things one that I definitely don't agree with from a policy perspective, and one that I don't know what the solution is, but it's wild. My joke solution was start handing out Chandra emblems after an hour. See who dies first. Race to the bottom. Okay, now we get into my actual game. I was in second position. As you can see from my tweet, one from second versus some decks. I don't know, my brain is mush. I couldn't even remember what their commanders were. This game was a disaster. There was Tymna Thrazios, me on Tymna Kraum, that Florian player from earlier, the Rakdos deck, and then a Tymna Tana player, not the same one I played earlier, but another non-blue Creature Stacks deck. This game took forever, not quite 3 hours, but it was a major slog. And I ended up killing all 3 opponents with non-commander combat damage. You can see here the Tymna Thrazios, is that who it was? Yeah, the Tymna Thrazios player just going down in small chunks all the way down to dead. And then this is me. I end the game at 8. And then the Florian player, he had an early Necropotent, so he was doing a lot of damage to himself and had to keep dealing damage to himself to even be in the game. And he necroed himself down to 1 at some point, trying to spike Final Fortune and get another turn straight into going off. And he missed on Final Fortune, and I was able to just pick him off at 1. And then the last player, you could see their life total go 12, 8, 4. This was a line where I had Kraum. It was the only creature with flying in play. We both had a ton of creatures on the ground, and some of them had lifelink, some had other words, and I just didn't want to get them involved in combat. I didn't want to figure out the combat math. I'm not going to lie. I was very tired. I attacked him from 12 to 8 with Kraum. Then I silenced him on his upkeep, and he just passed back. Then I attacked him from 8 to 4 with Kraum. Then I cast Final Fortune to take an extra turn and attack him from 4 to 0 with Kraum. Just tempo out at the very end there. This was a crazy slog of a match where nobody was ever able to combo because everybody had multiple 8 bears and sax pieces into play at all times. And it just came down to air elemental. Freaking Kraum, man. Just 4/4 flying. Come at me. At the end of the night, I forgot to add a winner pod picture. So there's no tweet for that, but we can go back to my winner tweet. I'll just leave my deck list up while I try to talk about this. The winner pod was Trevor on Tymna Kraum. He was in first position. A player on some... I'm really brain farting. Oh, I have a picture on my phone. I can figure this out. Okay, it was Trevor from the round 6 pod on Tymna Kraum. The other deck was Tymna Thrasios. And then it was Ian again from the round 6 pod on Thrasios Bruce Tarl. And then me on Tymna Kraum. I was in last position. And this game was... Trevor just took a really slow posture. He had like Esper Sentinel into Draneth Magistrate to slow the game down and try to draw cards from first position. The Tymna Thrasios player was getting a lot of creature-based engines online, like Fiend Artisan and Divining Witch and all these things that build value from play. With the Draneth Magistrate in play from Trevor, he could never deploy his commanders. Ian had an early Thrasios that I pyroblasted because I don't want him to get into the Seedborn Muse Thrasios phase of the game and just start gaining advantage. So I killed Thrasios, and this game ended up going really long, and I made a lot of decisions that indicate how I want to play cEDH. One of them was I had Tymna very early before the Draneth Magistrate came down, and then in an early turn, I used Dress Down in Ian's end step to turn off Draneth Magistrate going into my turn so I could play Kraum. And then I just passed the turn. And Dress Down against a deck with 4 Thassa's Oracle combo decks in it is one of the more potent weapons. But I used it very early just to get Kraum into play because that's what I wanted to be doing. After the previous round, I wanted to be attacking. I wanted to be getting that steady value from Kraum. So my Dress Down's gone, but Kraum's in play. Later on in the game, I have Cyclonic Rift, and I can use it in Ian's end step to try to go for a win on my turn, but everyone has a ton of cards in hand, so I don't do that. I end up using it in Trevor's end step to bounce all of Tymna Thrasios' creatures, like the Fiend Artisan and all these things that are generating value. I just get those out of play, make him spend a turn redeploying them. And everybody spending that turn redeploying stuff, I drew a bunch of cards off Kraum because they were all casting a bunch of spells. And then the next turn cycle, I used Diabolic Intent not to find Ad Nauseam, which I could have cast, but to find Swords to Plowshares to kill the Fiend Artisan to make sure that that player couldn't do anything. And I was just chilling with Kraum, getting my 4/4 attacks in, drawing my extra cards, and just making sure nobody else could win. Somewhere around turn 10, I cast an Enlightened Tutor, and even though everybody already had a ton of mana in play, I got Rhystic Study, and Ian, when I cast the Enlightened Tutor, made some quip like, oh, I think we're all dead. And I was like, oh no, this is not the type of Magic I'm trying to play, and I put Rhystic Study on top of the deck. I want to be here all night. This will eventually draw a card. Let's go. And there ended up being a fight over the Rhystic Study, and it didn't come into play. So it ended up being like a Thoughtseize, clearing a counter spell at least. Then we went a few more turn cycles. It was clear that Tymna Kraum was running out of gas, and Ian in third position, with me in fourth position. I had everything in my hand. I had Mnemonic Betrayal, Underworld Breach, Brain Freeze, just the whole squad rolled up in my hand, but I couldn't do any of it because of all the hate bears that were in play. There was a Dothy Voidwalker, there was a Draneth Magistrate, just couldn't get anything going. I was just attacking with my Kraum, whittling people down. I was targeting the person who controlled Draneth Magistrate because they were pretty close to dead to commander damage, and player removal is permanent removal, as we know. And Ian went for a big move on his turn where he cast a overloaded Cyclonic Rift. He had Seedborn Muse in play. I believe his plan was to clear the Drannith Magistrate, deploy Thrazios, and then just go off, like build all the value over the next couple turn cycles. But Trevor ended up fighting over the Cyclonic Rift, and they fought back and forth a little bit. And like 2 or 3 items into that stack, that fight over Cyclonic Rift, Ian said, wait a minute, maybe I want this Drannith Magistrate in play, actually. Like at some point he tapped out of too much mana that he wouldn't have been able to play Thrazios anyway. And that was when he was like, okay, maybe I want to stop fighting over this. And Ian and Trevor had a little conversation where Trevor was like, I can stop him if he does it a certain way, which was kind of like cryptic politicking of like, I have an answer, wink, wink, but I'm not going to tell you what it is. And Ian was like, okay, I'm going to believe you on this one, and then let the Cyclonic Rift. Then he fought over the Cyclonic Rift one more time to make sure it resolved. And then he passed the turn into my turn with everything clear, all the stacks pieces gone, and I was able to resolve Mnemonic Betrayal, which is now unlocked because the Drannith is gone. And one of the graveyards had Imperial Seal and Gataxian Probe in it, which is a build your own Demotic Tutor, and you get a bunch of information out of it. So I tutored for whatever combo piece I was missing. It might have been Brain Freeze or Thassa's Oracle. I don't really remember. I tutored for whatever combo piece I was missing. And then because Trevor made this cryptic remark of, I can stop him if he does it a certain way, I Gataxian Probed him. I figured he was the hand I needed to know about. And the probe showed me Angel's Grace, which is a card that sometimes gets played in cEDH, but is not in my deck, is not in consideration of my deck. I would have never played around in a million years, and it would have blown me out if I just went for the Oracle win. But luckily I saw it. So then I had to figure out, how can I get through an Angel's Grace? And my first thought was, put enough on the stack to scare Trevor into firing it off, and then cast Final Fortune, take an extra turn, and win then. But I found another line, which is Tymna Thrazios' graveyard had Elvish Mystic and Neoform in it. So I cast Elvish Mystic, which is a 1-drop. Then I Neoformed for a 2-drop. And once your 2-drop appears, it's too late to respond to it. You need to respond to Neoform if you're going to respond to anything. And I Neoformed for Grand Abolisher, which meant the Angel's Grace couldn't be cast. And then Trevor was like, oh no, I messed up. And then I just had the Breach and Brain Freeze from hand and managed to navigate that game. Oh, it was a long game. It was the middle of the night. I was so miserable. I was like asleep in my hand on the table. Like Alan from Mental Misplay was in the room taking some pictures, and I look bad, man. I feel bad. I spent a lot of that game with my head just resting on my hand like this, with my thumb up to indicate that I was passing priority. Just couldn't talk, couldn't look, and had to snap out of a coma once in a while to actually do something. It was a long day, a long tournament, and ended up pulling ahead and taking it. And the big lesson in that one is I never attempted to win until I had it just locked, ready to go. What I learned from the game with 2 of those 3 same opponents earlier in the day was, if I start a slugfest, then someone else is going to slide in. And that's exactly what happened again. Ian started a fight, Trevor fought over it, and then I slid in and won the game after they emptied their hands out fighting each other. And just relentless patience, make sure that I was making the game take longer. Multiple opportunities to tutor for a win, but I tutored for interaction instead. And just take my time, attack for 4, draw my cards of return. And eventually, someone's going to slip up. And the cool thing about commander damage with Kraum is, if you focus on the person, not necessarily the person, but if you focus on any person, that person's survival instincts are going to kick in at some point, where once you have 16 or 20 Kraum damage, you're going to start casting spells, whether it's good for the table or not, because you're about to die. And I think part of Trevor's big fight at the end there was, I'm almost dead to Kraum, and I don't care about the rest of the table. Like, if I'm dead, it doesn't matter. And that was part of my plan. Like, you just make the game take longer until somebody messes up, and Kraum forces errors because, I mean, I don't even know if it's fair to call them errors. It's just forces action, in which point you can slide through and take advantage of that action that is necessary because they're about to die. And well, I'm almost as wiped out from this tournament report as I was from the tournament. This was a lot of words in a row and a lot of stretching my memory to find them. Anyway, that's my tournament report for winning Okotoberfest. Want to shout out the cEDH community in general. Just didn't have a problem with anyone all weekend. There were some politicking that got a little shovey, but I think it was all in good faith, in good gamesmanship. I don't feel like I was slighted by anyone, and I don't think anyone left the table mad at me. That's just part of the game. Shout out to Mikey from Eminence Events, who hosted me at his house and has been really nice, and he's got me in all sorts of discords and group texts and stuff that have facilitated a bunch of other opportunities in the community. I'm pretty new to this community, and I feel like I've been fully embraced by it. Shout out to those various discords I'm in. I did not invent Blue Farm. I did not even invent most of the technology that I decided to adopt. I just mix and matched from other people's opinions how I wanted the deck to look, and theory crafted the things that I liked out of the 130, 140 or so reasonable options, the 100 cards that looked best for me. And shout out to everyone who contributed any of those ideas. Shout out to Alana and Mike Sad Robot and the Playing with Power crew and everyone who was at Star City Columbus earlier this year, which may seem like a random throwback, but that was my first real opportunity to sit down and just play games in random pods with the wider community outside of Discords, outside of curated streams or whatever. I was really just in the mix with people who knew what they were doing. And I learned a lot that weekend that I still carry today, that I've iterated on and built upon. And if I didn't have those 2 days in Columbus with all of those people just welcoming me in, I would not even know where I was. I would have been making a lot more mistakes based on the format than I actually did. I don't know that I have much more to say about this particular event, except I'm looking forward to the next one. I will be traveling to cEDH tournaments whenever they make sense for me to do. There's one coming up in California that's out of my range without sponsorship. Wink, wink. Anyone want me out there? I'm listening. But there's one coming up in Pennsylvania next year. There's one in Atlanta that's also kind of far, but it's a lot closer than California. I'm looking at my calendar. I'm going to try to make it to these. Big fan. Thank you all for watching, and thank you all for supporting my cEDH adventure that started on this very channel when one of my Patreon subscribers wanted me to play cEDH on the channel, and that's where I got into the format and started meeting people. I missed some shout outs. I got a shout out Hermit Druid, who looped me into cEDH Twitter right away. Mental Misplay, who had me on their channel right away. They're just like, oh, you started doing this? Jump on. Modanon, who also has had me on the channel a bunch of times. I made a lot of mulligan decisions this weekend based on Modanon's teachings. Really smart. Dan, Moderately Anonymous, go check out that stuff. And I met Allahan from the Mind Sculptors and Spleenface, who were two of the first people I ever played cEDH with. They were two of the people who showed up on the internet to jump into that pod that I signed up for on my channel a year and a half ago. They just showed up out of the Twitter aether and said, yeah, we'll play with you. And finally got to meet them in person. If I missed anyone else, sorry. You know, I was excited to hang out and meet you all, but this video is already dragging longer than I intended. I appreciate you all for sticking through this long. If you want to stick around for part 2 of the video, where Matt Sperling and I talk about tuning Blue Farm, coming outside of the cEDH world and just picking up the cEDH best deck and seeing where we wanted to take it and what theory we apply to it, that's coming next. Thank you all, and I'll see you for the next section.
This video is sponsored by Moxfield.com, the easiest way to build Magic decks online. Moxfield supports over 30 formats, including Legacy and every other format you'll see on this channel.
They have multiple customizations so you can view your deck how you want. Text view, stacks, grid, custom grouping by type, subtype, color, light mode, dark mode. However you want to see your deck, they can provide it for you. My favorite feature is you can choose your set printing, make the deck look exactly how you want it to. The deck screen features expandable sections that show you what tokens your deck makes, your recent change history to the deck, stats about mana curve and opening hand distribution, mana cost distribution. You can deal out sample hands and even play test the deck. Island Ponder. You know I'm keeping this one. This site has everything. Follow me on moxfield.com to keep up with decks I'm playing for the channel and what I'm up to in paper. I'll see you there. As promised, I'm here with Matt Sperling. Hey, Matt.
Hey, how's it going? Congrats on the win.
Thanks. Appreciate it. And appreciate your thoughts on the list going into it. Some of them were integral in my success, and that's what we're here to talk about. And we're coming from a similar background of Magic tournament grinder at not necessarily long EDH history, certainly not long cEDH history. It's about a year and a half for me, much shorter for you, just a couple months, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's fun having all this, like raw magic power arriving in the cEDH space. I have a lot of people talk about me as if I'm a Magic Pro, which makes me uncomfortable because although I do make a living at playing Magic, there is a tier of people defined as Magic Pros over the year that you certainly qualify as, where when I say something like, yeah, I guess I'm a Magic Pro, I feel like I'm disrespecting the actual Magic Pros. And like, I'm not trying to like blow smoke up your ass to start this video off, but just like, it's one of those weird things where if you're coming from like Goober tier casual, getting to like where I am is unimaginable. And I feel like there's a huge gap between me and like, Paulo.
I mean, yeah, I think, well, that discomfort persists in different ways anyways, no matter where you are and what you've achieved. I mean, I always feel weird when people like at work who don't know that, not only does he play Magic, he's like, the best in the world, it's always like, no, not really. And it's not the big a deal. And it's not, it's a big fish in a small pond thing and all that. But look, I mean, you've had really consistent success, in these eternal formats before even we talked about cEDH, and so I think you certainly earned your place among really strong players, types of conversations. So again, whether people use the exact accurate label with me, you, or otherwise, I mean, it's random, but in general, I mean, I think you don't need to shy away from folks regarding you as a strong player.
Right, and it's cool that I have that, and you and I have been chatting about Magic since the year I won Eternal Weekend, which I guess was about 2 years ago. That you were also in that top 8, and we started interacting on Twitter. We were
it had to be just a little over 2 years ago because it was pre-COVID, but like just right about then, it was maybe one of the last things, maybe like the year before, maybe like a 2019 term or something. I don't know. But so it's been a couple of years, since we've been sort of comparing notes and talking online. And look, I mean, I think honestly, it's been great talking to you and working with you on stuff, because I actually think the most instructive thing for people about your victory with that deck this last weekend, or your sort of success with cEDH, is actually like thinking about how open-minded you were, having a lot more experience than I had, not just with the format, with the deck in particular, and saying, I'm going to look at the cards that Matt's talking about and sort of have an open mind about them and sort of pick and choose which ones I want to try out or adopt, or even though I do want to do well in this tournament. I think like that willingness to listen and try and learn is just something that people are gonna really struggle to do well without that. And so I think you should, again, for me, it's like that would be like the biggest lesson. Whether you like Lavinia or hate Lavinia is sort of neither here nor there at the end of the day. So I think like what goes into your success is a lot of times not so much about one card here, one card there, but just a general attitude and approach, trying to like learn and refine the tool. And if I can borrow something from this person's approach and something from that person's approach and add a little bit of my own, like maybe I'll have something that's greater than the sum of its parts. And that sort of mentality, I think, is really valuable. So, it's one of the reasons why I think it'd be fun to talk about sort of what we how we got here and sort of what went into that tournament prep, because I think that general approach is just so so helpful to have, and obviously like that's a big driver of having success in a new format or with a new tournament, whatever.
Right. And I just recorded an hour-long tournament report going through my Twitter feed right before I jumped on this call with you, where I made it clear that I did not invent Blue Farm. That was well established. Right. Like that 130 or so card pool was already kicking around long before I showed up in the format, and someone else, dozens, hundreds of others, got me to the just under the top of the mountain, and then I took a step up from there based on my thoughts and contributions of others. I don't think there's a single card in my 100 cards that I thought of, I just pulled out of the ether. It was just like, oh, I saw this in a list, or Alex likes this, Matt likes this, Alana likes this, and just picking from people I trust, and then theory crafting where I want to be with the exact 100.
Yeah, I sometimes fall into a trap occasionally of sort of wanting to have a sufficient sort of quotient of ownership over something where you sort of don't want to play stock, or you want to like at least have a spin on. And I like to think and talk about it as if I was immune to that, as if I was sort of all about cutting the opponent, as opposed to caring about how cool your sword looks and that sort of, I like to speak in those sorts of metaphors. I think it's helpful to try to aim for that and say like, look, like, if EDH is about displaying your cool sword and doing this sort of semi choreographed sword play, but it's not really real, and then cEDH is about just all I care about is cutting my opponent before they cut me. Look, I mean, again, I think that's aspirationally true for me, but then there are moments where it's like, well, I do want to sort of have some of my stamp on it, or I want to have that feeling of like, well, I also did something really cool here. So I think you got to acknowledge human nature and your own nature as you're sort of also aspiring towards something that's maybe a little bit less human, a little bit more sort of ideal. So yeah, those things are fun to talk about too.
Yeah, and we're going to get into that. I have up in my other window a Moxfield comparison. Moxfield, just one of the many awesome things that website does is you can copy someone else's deck URL and compare to yours, and they tell you what cards are different and what your maybe boards look like. Just freaking awesome. And we're going to see that in a second here. And some of your stuff, I was like, wow, that's really smart. And some of it, I was like, no, there's too much power gone. Now this looks like a 1v1 deck at this point, and it's too far gone. And I didn't adopt some of it.
Yeah.
And yeah, that feeling of ownership, I get it. I like it. But also, when it comes to time to win a tournament, I'm not going to put my ego in deck building above the ego I cash in when I got that winner picture, assuming it's about ego at all, which, there's a little involved. I'm not going to lie, but hopefully not to the point of detriment.
Yeah, right. I mean, look, at the end of the day, we're not playing to save the world, right? I mean, we're playing for, and again, like, you don't want to set up this thing where you're trying to, I play for, I don't care about external validation. All I care about is, whether I win or lost, and whether I was anonymous or not. I'd have this. It's like, look, these things are just perfectly natural and okay, but yeah, you just want to sort of keep a check on different extremes. And anyways, I think, players oftentimes will start at such an extreme, one side or the other, where you don't care about winning at all and you're trying to get into the format. We came from we came from a competitive 60 card environment where, obviously, like tournament, how to prepare for a tournament and what to care about. I mean, that stuff was sort of things we had to work out years ago. And so that stuff's not new to us. So we're going to probably take to that a lot easier. But some people listening, they may be coming from a different background where they're going like, oh, okay, I need to spend some time thinking about how to prep for a tournament, what to care about, what mindset, not even what to care, what mindset to get into to really tune a deck or whatever. So I offer some of that advice just from that perspective.
Yeah, that collision when that second wave of grinders, or the big wave of grinders, I don't know how far ahead of them I was. I just had a random channel subscriber ask me to play cEDH, and I was in this community a little bit, and I was already adjacent on Twitter when like Drake and Bryant and Alex and all these 60 card grinders started sliding in, and there was a lot of hurt feelings at first where I'm in a Discord with a number of those guys, and I've said like, you idiots need to chill, more than once of like, this tier list that's funny behind closed doors might actually hurt feelings on Twitter. And like, I'm just not interested in that kind of drama. But at the same time, there's a lot of people who receive like a joke tier list on Twitter as a personal affront to their value as a Magic player and a thinker in the world. And there's a sweet spot in between where, just it gets lost on the internet, and nobody out here is out here with bad faith for the most part, but detaching your value as a human from winning games and from your deck being your deck, eventually these are all Richard Garfield's Magic cards on Al Gore's internet.
I learned. I learned a ton and have a lot more affection for the format, having played it in paper now a couple of times, and only a couple times. But I played a lot at Magic 30. I played at a local meetup, and like when you shuffle up a real deck and you sit down with real people, and you're not through a screen or over a spell table or Discord. Yeah, like again, it's all of a sudden all this chest puffing and weird arguments is just not what's happening. Instead, it's just people playing a game, having fun, and it's sort of like people have cool ideas that they've worked on, they've gotten good practice with, and they actually can have a big impact on a game, even if in your Discord we regard that idea as sort of a second best or third best idea. So, anyways, definitely always a good antidote to getting too sort of rabbit hole in the internet stuff is just shuffle up some real cards and hang out with some real people. So that's been my experience too.
Yep. Cure for talking about Magic is playing Magic. Always has been.
Yeah.
Let me get this Mox field up. Let me share my screen, figure out how to do that real quick.
Sounds good. I wonder how many of the how much of the Delta I could name off, but we'll save the viewers from that mundane exercise and just present it.
All right. Are you looking at Mox field right now?
Yes, I am.
All right, cool. So am I. So this one right here on the screen right now is my winning list, as it is. And this window is my list before Okotoberfest compared to your list that you have posted on Moxfield.
Gotcha. Okay.
This group up here is cards that you had that I don't, and this group is cards that I had that you don't.
Yeah, I recognize some of those famous cards I don't have. Yeah, that makes sense.
Right.
And yeah. So where do you want to start?
I guess I'll start with things that I immediately fell in love with, which were Cavern of Souls Grand Abolisher. Grand Abolisher, I've seen this one in play in other Blue Farm lists. Alana, specifically at CG Columbus, was my first real foray into waiting amongst the people and playing paper cEDH. And every time she had this card and play, the game was just over. And I was asking myself why I'm not playing it. And I wanted to get there anyway. And fleshing it out with the Cavern of Souls, which then also gives you another point towards playing Lavinia, which is a card that I love. I was immediately just sold on these three cards.
Yeah, Grand Abolisher was a card that I just saw in lists that weren't Blue Farm, I think, and I just sort of asked myself, well, I got there a couple different ways. I mean, first of all, I realized that like a big reason to be white, at least from my perspective, in your sort of ad nauseum combo deck, is these silencing type of effects that are just really powerful. And sort of, yeah, I mean, you play a couple games, you figure out that silence and Ranger Captain are good, but it was like, sort of why stop there? So, I mentioned in someone else's conversation with someone else that I'm also not necessarily going to stop at Grand Abolisher. I've actually been looking at Orm's Chant, but and whether I end up trying Orm's Chant and Blue Farm or reserving that idea more for like the Winota or Stack space and sort of saying, okay, but basically, what I want to sort of interrogate these choices where somebody stops short of playing a very similar card to a card that we think is like really powerful, right? So if you think Ranger Captain is amazing and you'd play 3 if you could, and that sounds about right to me because it is really good. Now you could say this card's a little worse if you want to because you can't proactively stop somebody else, and all the reasons why it might be worse. But you say, okay, how much worse is it? That sort of thing. So that's how I got here to say like, let me try it. And I tried more than this. The list of cards here is not all the cards I tried. I tried some that just simply didn't work out. But this Grand Abolisher was like, wow. If I just add this card to the stack, it's super scary. It's not a card I want my opponents to add to the stack. It's hard to stop, and it doesn't have the Teferi effect, which I had to learn the hard way when I had Teferi in my deck, that if I pass with little Teferi out, then like my opponents can't stop each other, and you sort of oops, like I just helped somebody else win. Well, Grand Abolisher is one sided like that. Anyways, so that was sort of the convergence of a few things, and then Lavinia and Grand Abolisher both fall into the category of one-sided stacks bears, which maybe that's too much jargon to be helpful, but if you're familiar with the jargon, like these aren't effects that hit the whole table. It hits everybody but you. Whether you're talking about the inability to play spells in opponent's turns, or you're talking about the inability to play free spells in Lavinia's case, I found that my Tymna deck really wants to have a body out there to help draw cards with my commander, and these effects can really have an outsized impact where I'm asking the table something. Hey, if you're a faster combo deck, are you sure you can win through this card? In Lavinia's case, but I'm not sort of posing that question to myself in a way where I have to like answer it before I go off, like some other stacks pieces would do. So it's sort of like there's like a grand experiment happening, and there's like a micro experiment. The micro experiment's more about particular cards and sort of how to get more silence effects in your deck. And the bigger experiment is like how do we play sort of a one-sided stacks bears approach to Blue Farm. So I've tried other ones too. I've tried Voidwalker and others.
Right. One of my pet projects in the format, which I don't think is competitively viable because the mana is too strict, is Rafine. I built a Rafine tempo stack that has a combo kill, and it's in the Esper Wedge, so everything that Rafine could play, so can Tymna Kraum, and it's just maxed out on this sort of thing. The Grand Abolisher, the Lavinia, the Drannith Magistrate, Opposition Agent, Dothy Voidwalker, these are all these one-sided stack spares, and all of them have seen play in Tymna Kraum. I played against a Dothy Voidwalker in the finals of Okotoberfest, and it was pretty potent the whole time. And just adding more of these, definitely going back to your position of I'd play 3 Ranger Captains if I could. Like, yeah, that's how EDH works. You don't get 3 of the best card. What's the second best card? And then studying what words are different, what effect are different. Like, the fairy, like you mentioned, shuts down the whole table all the time, so nobody can protect a win at any point except you. Grand Abolisher only does it on your turn for you, so that gets a point in the right direction. You mentioned Orum's Chant. Orum Chant's target, so you have to pick your Huckleberry. It doesn't shut down the whole table compared to all the other silence effects that are just global. So that could be a big detriment there. But yeah, getting closer and closer to the words on the best card, which Grand Abolisher in many ways is even better than Ranger Captain, depending on the board state. Like, you don't need to activate. There's no window where they can silence you in response to your Ranger activation. It's just, if I untap, we're in there.
And you can Final Fortune, and then the effect persists. And these things have all come up for me. You're right. Like it, I think another thing, again, speaking in sort of lessons and sort of things that I would instruct somebody I was, mentoring or coaching. One of the things is just understanding, like, you want to start learning in the abstract and in generalizations, and you want to sort of get an understanding of what's important. And when I was new to the format, I was learning things like, well, the things that don't cost mana, like, Rhystic Study triggers are like super valuable, whereas something that we have to pay a mana to draw a card, it's like, even if it happens a lot, like, mana is such a premium. These are like high concepts, right? About how precious mana is and how you only get one untap step per 4 turns, all that stuff. But eventually, like, you have to get really concrete, and then like all the things that you're talking about with Grand Abolisher, and then I'm talking about where, like, oh, how does it interact with Final Fortune, another card you're likely to cast at some point if you have both in your deck, or even when we're looking at, okay, do we want to play Chance for Glory and add another sort of Time Walk effect, and maybe the more, if I'm a person that really loves Necropotence in TNK, and okay, that makes me more likely to play it, but that should also make me more likely to play Grand Abolisher. So these kinds of things where you're getting really concrete, thinking about how the cards interact, you're thinking about particular strengths and weaknesses and different kinds of game states. Another thing, and when I've talked about what I've learned about TNK over these last few weeks, and it's been weeks, not months, I've learned a few things, like the fact that you're not trying to go that fast. I mean, you have that. I mean, the gas pedal's there, and you can slam on it if you have the right hand, but you're not looking to go as fast as Rogsai is, for example, like on a consistent, repeated basis, right? So you also need to think about which cards are valuable to you if it's a turn 2 or a turn 4, or if it's turn 2, 3, and 4, right? And so I think some of these cards fit that bill. Lavinia to me was much stronger than Defense Grid. Actually, people have sent me their list that has Defense Grid in it, not Lavinia. I'm like, here's an easy one for you. Take out the Defense Grid, put in the Lavinia. Not only can it attack and get your card off Tymna, but it's going to do something. It's not just good on that gas pedal turn, right? It's actually also good turn. If you go first and play Lavinia, which I've done, it's like awesome. People can't even play their mana. They certainly can't ad nauseum until they get 5 lands. Like all this really good stuff happens. They can't kill it with Deadly Rollick. Like really good, nice stuff is going to happen with that Defense Grid just doesn't offer you. So I think you have to realize how a card plays into your game plan and sort of how the flexibility offers. Anyways, so there's a lot we can go on, and I think oftentimes I'll switch back and forth between something very specific and concrete and like a high level concept. So I'll talk about like the ceiling and floor of a card and sort of think about that in terms of like a very specific the ways in which it plays out frequently that are when it's not so good, here's why it's not so good, and here's how bad it is. And when things play out well for it, how often does that happen and how good is it? And that might take us into the cavern pretty quickly, but that's sort of another useful exercise for figuring out how good the cards are.
Right. And just anecdotally from this tournament, the 9 rounds that I played, Grand Abolisher was in play frequently because I prioritized it, and I won every game except one. At one point, someone did have the Otawara into 1 mana disruption to clear my Abolisher and stuff me. Like, that'll happen some small amount of the time, but every other time this card just ended the game on arrival. Lavinia, I had in play a couple of times and it was always fine. The difference between Lavinia and Abolisher in testing is interesting too, because you kind of have to ask the table at the end of the game, how was Lavinia? Because you just don't see the cards that Lavinia is shutting down. Where Abolisher, it's very obvious what it's doing. And Lavinia, it's like, she didn't even do anything. And then your opponent's like, I have Adnaz, Breach, LED all in my hand. I can't cast any of them right now. And it's less clear what she actually does.
Yeah, for sure. It's harder. It's definitely harder to learn from a card where the impact isn't so visible. It's like sometimes you can't tell how bad the expensive cards are because you sort of every time the opponent casts one, it kicks you in the teeth, but you don't see all the times they can't cast it. Yeah, all that stuff definitely makes it hard to get more reliable intuition for how good the cards are.
Right.
And also, another thing I try to think about that is actually I'm on that Discord with these folks that like to play, sort of like a fast sort of legacy combo style of cEDH, and I try to like also keep in mind that not every pod is going to feel that way. So also having cards that are a little bit better in just like a normal ordinary pod or like your average tournament pod. I try to like at least try to think about that. Like what's the average tournament pod going to look like as opposed to like what are the last 2 pods I've played on Discord, which in my experience are going to be a little different.
Right. In any game that I've fired on Discord, I would love Blue Elemental Blast in my deck, and that would have been good in a very small number of the 9 tournament rounds that I played this past weekend. Like you do get a little inbred if you're playing with all the same people, and Lavinia versus Winota is a very different animal than Lavinia versus Rograk, and that just comes up. But building to the floor, you mentioned that. I say this all the time in my content on my channel. I love building decks to raise the floor rather than the ceiling. I'm not optimizing for turn 1. I'm optimizing to have a turn 5. And that's just kind of how I approach deck building in general and deck selection, because not every deck is built to do that. If you sign up for Rogsai, you can grind. I'm not one of these people who says Rogsai dies if it doesn't win in the first 2 turns. We've seen contrary evidence to that on camera, but I'm not choosing a deck that wants to go fast. I'm choosing a deck that wants 5, 6, 7 turns in a game.
Yeah, absolutely. And thinking about also like your relationship to the different ways that opponents can play. So I like to describe Rogsai as trying to go under, mid-range and stack opponents, meaning just win before they set up. Whereas I think T&K Blue Farm is actually better equipped to win as they're setting up or after or slightly after they've set up. Obviously, like it becomes difficult to win when Winota is attacking you with 20 creatures, but like as just in a different way, like a turn or 2 later than Rogsai. And so that again, so then you'll see cards in my deck like, Wear Chair or Cyclonic Grid. I mean, there are some choices that aren't on this screen because we both picked them up for whatever reason, right? So I think, playing the Cyclonic Rift or whatever, I don't know. There's also things like the I don't want to leave home without either Deluge or Fire Covenant, because I want to have a way to come back from on big boards. And I've played more games with Deluge in my deck than Fire Covenant, but I think you want like one of those, if not both potentially. But I'd rather play 2 than 0. I think 0 is a little bit dangerous. You get stuck a little bit too much with a flush hand, but there's too much going on the board and it's hard to recover. So I think like just things like that I'm not necessarily sure that's a good card in Roxai or somewhere else, but I think it's a good card here because we're not trying to like Wheel of Fortune 5 times, before they set up.
Right. You also have a commander with lifelink. You also have a bunch of creatures of your own. Let's go to my final difference real quick to talk about that. This is where we ended up. These are the cards that are only in my deck. These are the cards that are only in yours.
Okay, much closer.
Yeah, much closer in the final list. But Fire Covenant did make the cut, as we're talking about that. I've been on my just like stock list that I don't update that aggressively because I don't really have reason to. I'm always kicking around like, do I want a Toxic Deluge? I don't know. I want the clear, but my deck's full of creatures too. Fire Covenant was exactly in that sweet spot that I wanted. And this one, it's kind of risk reward. If we're talking about building strictly to the floor, I think that Deluge is better because it's safer. But Fire Covenant gives you kind of the same effect with upside. I got this thing deflecting swatted in the tournament, and I just wanted to die immediately.
Yeah,
and
that doesn't sound fun.
Yeah, that's tough. And if this gets countered, and I believe the Oracle text of this, the life is part of the cost. So just dispel, you still lose your 13 life or whatever.
Yeah, Deluge too, but this one you're way more likely to pay more life. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, you're usually paying like 7 to 15 to clear a board with Covenant. You're paying 2 or 3 with Deluge.
Yeah, instant was the tiebreaker for me to have this in the list I published right now. I think instant helps you do things like end step before you untap. I'm gonna clear out everything, even the Ranger capped. I mean, so there's some like dream scenarios that instant unlocks, but I'm with you. Like, I'm honestly not sure whether I want to be playing with Deluge, Covenant, or both. I'm like, I've only convinced myself that I don't want none, and that's really all I've convinced myself so far. And if someone said to me, you know what, I've been playing with Blue Farm and I want to play Path to Exile or Slaughter Pact, like I wouldn't look at that person like they're crazy. But for me, I've just wanted that one card that goes bigger. Maybe I'll need to tutor for it, or maybe I just need to get out of a stickier situation than what Path to Exile would allow me to get out of.
Yeah, I won every game where Fire Covenant resolved on the spot, where you would need to rebuild a little bit from Toxic Deluge because you're also a creature deck. You'd lose something along the way. But I also got blown out a couple times. There was a really interesting decision in the finals where it was up to me to answer a Fiend Artisan that was about to kill the table. And I Diabolic Intented, and I could get Swords to Plowshares and just pick off the Fiend Artisan, and I'm sure it would have worked. The rest of the table would have helped me punch that through. Or I could get Fire Covenant and clear everyone's business. But then we get into that, who's the bigger threat? Like, maybe we don't let this one resolve. And I ended up just getting Plow and playing it safe. But yeah, the temptation of Fire Covenant and the power level, if I was sure it just would have resolved, I would have gotten this easily. But the table politics, it's nice to have different flexible answers, and instant speed is just so big on this thing.
Yeah. So, if you're watching this to get instruction about the deck list, I mean, try both out, play around, and think about your expected metagame. I think the more likely you are to play against creature decks that don't contain the color blue, the more you should be excited about Fire Covenant, because now you can do that really powerful. I mean, there's almost a game-ending effect, whereas if you're playing against like blue creature decks, it's sort of like, there's this thing that happens where now there's a counter war, and if you lose a bunch of life. And, so just food for thought.
Yep, and watch out for SWAT out of those non-blue decks.
Yeah, definitely.
Right. So Cavern of Souls is, I would consider this the major thing. Every time I looked at this, I was like, thanks, Matt, over the course of the tournament, more than any of these other cards. This is a card I have not seen outside of your list. I've seen all these other cards, but this one seems like a truly, as far as I know, your idea. Where did this one come from?
Yeah, and look, there's nothing new under the sun, so I'm sure there's independently other people have thought of it, and it's not
Right.
like it's a powerful card that's played. But yeah, I did sort of look through the deck. So I have deck boxes full of like modern playables, legacy playables, vintage playables. So when I'm pulling out cards like Lavinia and Cavern, A, it doesn't mean I'm the first person to ever think of it, and B, it's just because like these are just in my there's only so many cards that are playable in those really powerful formats. So I look at a card, I say, hey, if this is a really powerful effect in legacy and modern, well, it's worth a moment of pause to think about what does it do in my deck and what effect could it have. And when I thought about sort of what my deck's trying to do and these really powerful creatures, like how often you win when you've resolved Ranger Captain or Grand Abolisher or even an early Lavinia, like how often you win. It's like, well, don't you want to put a card in that's low opportunity cost that helps you get to that? So that's sort of figured, okay, yeah, let me sort of play as a combo. The other thing that really happened that I didn't know was going to happen when I played cEDH was that there was going to be this game state that came up over and over again where like somebody had a Rhystic Study out or a Remora and they just had a 20 card hand or whatever, between 10 and 30 cards in their hand, and you and the rest of the table have to figure out, well, how is this person not just going to win the game now or when they untap or whatever? And you really like you don't have there isn't a bottomless toolbox of things that person is really going to be scared of when they are that resource rich. And even when you're that resource rich, you could end up in a slugfest that lets a third player. We've all played that game a couple times where you spend all your stuff stopping seat C, and either you're feeding this other fish over here or whatever, or you're depleted, and now the other person goes off. So I think like having something that is a trump card that really punches right through a big hand, unless they have a very specific thing like a 4 mana and a mind break trap, for example, or a silence for you. Anyway, so I think like I'm glad that you found it interesting enough to try and that you found it good because it's like this specific cEDH thing that I thought was happening often enough that I want to have something for that situation. Also, when I have 15 cards in hand, you have 15 cards in your hand, I needed something for that situation, and that's also a situation where I'm actually way more likely to have a 2-card combo sort of naturally, or be one tutor away and be scary. Like now someone goes they have to counter DT or whatever. Anyway, so all those things went into the fact that the more I looked at it, the more excited I got looking at it, and it makes these human creatures better. And also, you just have a commander that you're perfectly happy to have in play every game. That's a human, also that costs black white. So I figured like it's also not as punishing as it would be if I was looking to cast spells every turn instead of creatures, except for the key turn. That I'd say, well, it's pretty costly to have this cavern in my deck. But it turns out like one of the most colored mana intensive things I do every game is put Tymna onto the battlefield. And it really, I mean, not that many games go by where I don't try to cast Tymna.
Right. That was one of the tiebreakers for me when I was really thinking about, because I built a lot of 60 card decks, and my first thing I did was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 humans in the deck, 7 counting Tymna. Do I want Cavern of Souls for 7 hits? But the 7th hit is always in your opener and always looming, and at all points, there is no comparison to this, short of the brief time companions were legal and unnerfed in constructed, right. which was busted in case anyone forgot. And yeah, that just like, oh yeah, easily. This is the first thing I want to do basically every game. And Tavern's floor is cast my commander in an uncounterable fashion. And
yeah, and so big. Another thing to note for the viewer is just that you do sometimes name pirate, and you can actually get your Dockside Extortionist onto the battlefield in a spot where, look, I mean, if you haven't lost a game with Dockside Extortionist, you haven't played many games with cEDH, right? So I think that's another tool where it's like you can sort of just locate the counter war elsewhere, and you've got a bunch of mana. Like you're gonna be in good shape potentially. That they're obviously like now all of a sudden, you just don't even care when they use their counter. You have so much mana. So, anyways, these are late game situations. It was sort of late mid game or true late game situations, and I don't know that I would play. I'm not looking to put like Overmaster in my deck or something crazy where I'm using a whole deck slot on this ability to make one thing uncounterable. But when you look at a land that does it, you think about, again, the floor is a land that taps for a colorless. That's not a great card, but if the ceiling's high enough, then I'm in, and it doesn't cost you. I don't think you have to put it in a spell slot. I don't even though colorless mana is not always the best. I don't think it needs to go in a spell slot. So I think Cavern is worth consideration in a deck like this, even though your creature count's not high. It's not like you're going to play Cavern every turn. You're going to play a human, but if you do it once or twice, like you're good to go.
Yeah, and sometimes, like in my tournament report, I showcased 2 hands. One of them I was in 4th position with Cavern, Ancient Tomb, Grim Monolith, Ragavan, Dockside. So Cavern could pirate up and cast both of the pirates in my deck. I ended up shipping it just because I still had a free 7 coming. I didn't want all my colored mana to be tied up in Dockside and hoping Ragavan connects from 4th position. But I would have kept that hand in 1st or 2nd, I think. And the other one I showcased, I played a game against Nezahal, just mono blue. Their commander is an unconditional Remora that also claps for 7 and can't be killed. And I had Cavern of Souls for Esper Sentinel on turn 1, for Drannith Magistrate on turn 2, for Ranger Captain on turn 3. Then I popped Captain and Adnost. I didn't cast a counterable spell for the entire game against the mono blue counterspell deck. And it was just like, holy guacamole. Like, obviously that's like the Christmas nuts, but I mean, throw them on the fire because they were there. For the absolute best Magic the Gathering apparel on the market, check out the link in the video description to coalesceapparel.shop, and be sure to use the code BoshNRoll for 10% off when you check out.
Yeah, look, I mean, it brings me a lot of joy to hear that story because it's not exactly the exact scenario I envisioned. But you think, I mean, how important is counter magic in the format? It's hugely important. Another criticism I've heard of Cavern as well, the creatures are mostly uncounterable anyway, because a lot of the counter spells don't hit them because they're non-creatures, because they're creatures. So you need like a Force of Will or a Pact of Will. But look, uncounterable, I mean, almost uncounterable. There's a huge difference between almost and not, and games come down to, well, I almost had it, right? I mean, how often after a game, 1 to 3 players are sitting there going, I almost had it, whether it's enough mana or enough interaction or whatever. And so I think, yes, it is like creatures are almost uncounterable because they don't get hit by First Guardianship and Dispel and the like and Force of Negation and blah, blah, blah. But it's just, it's nice to be able to make it make it a little bit smoother than that. And plus, like, again, you play against Nezahal, they've got mana drain too. You have to keep in mind also that things are happening in a more diverse way. You don't want to get that tunnel vision because me and my best friend don't play mana drain. Does that mean you're not going to play against mana drain in a tournament? Absolutely not. You also have to sort of broaden your thinking a little bit. But counters are really strong. We found the strategy that we like that sort of is going over the top of that in a sense, and kind of cool that way.
Yeah, that point you just made of it's not in my metagame, it's not in my list. Like, I have an Najeela list and I don't play that card, so it's not in Najeela. It's just gonna hurt you. The Trevor, the person I played against in round 6 and in the finals, he was in both of those pods on Tymna Kraum. He had Dothy Voidwalker, he had Angel's Grace, he had Mana Drain. I don't know how many more cards different they were, but we were both Tymna Kraum Blue Farm. I'm sure we had a lot of the same cards, but at least 3 major differences that I saw come up in our games.
Well, Angel's Grace, near and dear to my heart, a card I tried for a while, and yeah, I think is a fine card. It's not in this list right now, but yeah, no, absolutely. Like, you got to keep an open mind about what belongs in your list, but also about what you're likely to play against, and also think about the value of flexibility is often, that you're encountering something that you're not familiar with. I mean, for me at this point in the format, sometimes I don't even know what someone's commander does until I sit down and I read their commander, and then I go, okay, let me try to think about how this game's likely to go down. So obviously, like, I have to maintain some level of flexibility, but even the folks who consider themselves fully versed in, the S tier of decks, or like, you're not going to sit down and play against 3 decks from what you consider to be that tier, you're going to play against a lot of things. So anyways, flexibility is valuable. I think, your game plan, cards that are good when your game plan doesn't go quite right are valuable. Anyways, I think we've probably talked a lot about some of the interesting inclusions. I think some of the cards that I am less interested in than other folks, I mean, we can talk about sort of how I think about those, but again, it sort of dovetails what I'm talking about now in terms of thinking about things as, is it really that flexible? Does it work that way? Does it work that well when things aren't going perfectly? And I try to sort of stay away from some cards that have that shape to them.
Right. So yeah, that's a good place to go next. And this one, for starters, I would say the hero cards, the famous cards, Diabolic Intent, Yawgmoth's Will, Intuition, Sabine's Reclamation are cards that you're not playing. And I met you halfway. I cut the Yawg Will, but I kept the Tutor, the Intuition, and the Sabine's Reclamation. And other than that, we're just a few pieces of mana base different. And for what it's worth, after the tournament, I think you're right about City of Traders. I do want Hallowed Fountain in that spot, just another colored source.
I know you expressed concern that you didn't own a foil Hallowed Fountain at the time. But
yeah,
you specified that.
There's a shameful record of Matt and I talking about these changes before the tournament, where I said I don't own a foil Wear Terror Hallowed Fountain, so there's just nothing to be done there.
Yeah,
but I have them now. They've
arrived. No problem. We're not playing with millions of lives at stake here. So if you don't own a card, you don't feel like buying it today, that's cool with me. And I'm also glad you're not asking us to spend 30 minutes on Windswept Heath versus Wooded Foothills as the 9th fetch land, because I think
I don't care at all. But for what it's worth, I usually fetch Badlands first in this deck, which Windswept Heath doesn't get. But with the Hallowed Fountain, that's another Plains, like Heath doesn't touch Fountain, so maybe there's something there. But we don't need to spend too much time on that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it matters much. It's just corner case versus corner case. But okay,
right.
On the cards that are sort of often regarded as sort of, I mean, look, I think Diabolic Intent, for example, I'm just a little bit down on Diabolic Intent and Imperial Steel. Also, Imperial Steel I have in my deck reluctantly, but because I'm Tymna and I can actually get access to the card same turn, I think it's good enough. If I'm actually like a different black deck that isn't good, like if I'm like the Gila, I probably wouldn't play Imperial Steel, which is going to sound crazy to people, but so be it. I think that waiting a full turn cycle and hoping that your card is still there and still the right card is just asking a lot. Even if one black mana is not a lot, like the rest of that is. So I actually don't think it's that. But with Tymna, okay, you hedge that. Diabolic Intent asks a different question. It asks you to have 2 mana and sacrifice a creature, and then you have to sacrifice a creature as cost. And so really, like, I look at my deck and I don't really have, so you realize it's not going to be an effective tutor early in the game. I mean, I don't have a creature out yet, or if I do, God forbid this gets countered, I'm going to have nothing going at all. And so it's really like a late game card, and I don't think it's like necessarily the most effective approach. It's fine. It's actually like perfectly. I have it in sort of on my watch list. It's perfectly fine. I just don't think you have. I mean, you're just not going to have a creature you want to sack all that off, especially once you're making investments in Grand Abolisher and Lavinia and Oppo Agent. You don't want to take those cards off the board yourself and find out what they've been holding, because now Lavinia is gone and now Oppo Agent is gone. You just don't want to find that out. And you certainly aren't, sacking a Bergie sounds painful to me. So anyway, I just think you can win a game with any tutor. I just think that it's not going to help you as often as the card that I'm cutting it for on balance. And I think I've got enough tutoring. And again, I'm going a little slower. I'm actually planning on finding something that wins the game, using draw 2 from Tymna and using like Remora and stuff. Like that's actually how I get access to a winning game plan, more than like pinpoint tutoring all the time for Underworld Breach. So anyways, that's where I landed on Intent. I don't know how it played out, how it's been playing out for you, or whether you sort of strongly disagree or mildly disagree, but I'd love to hear.
I agree with all of your theory. I've just found that in practice, sometimes you got to take your medicine on things like this.
Yeah.
Like the cards you're playing instead, which are like Spell Pierce, Wear Terror, these little like nickel and dime value things versus this absolute hammer. I pulled up the creatures here because of these 13 creatures, there's like Esper Sentinel, Dockside, and Ragavan that you might be actually not heartbroken to lose the Diabolic Intent.
every other card here is just like a nut engine or stacks piece that you don't want to get rid of. And like Simian Spirit Guide and Thassa's Oracle also barely count as creatures. So yeah, everything you said holds up. And in my finals match, when I had to Diabolic Intent to answer the Fiend Artisan, I had to sack Bergie to do it and didn't feel good, but also we didn't lose. And like Wear Tear Spell Pierce would not have helped me survive that turn cycle. So I think it's kind of a take your medicine thing. And it's also in the same vein as Culling the Weak. Sacrifice a creature, it has the same cost. Sacrifice a creature, gets some outrageous effect. And Culling the Weak is a card that if you put on the stack, it's because you're about to win the game. And Diabolic Intent, I've found, at least the way that I use it, it is a similar thing where I'm not just going to sack Tymna to go find Rhystic Study. You know, that's the same card for the most part. I'm either going to take my medicine, lose a creature to not die right now, or I'm winning anyway.
Yeah. It is. I mean, I agree, and that's why it's close. And I think you want to have a sufficient number of cards that are so powerful that you win the game if you can resolve them. And I think Diabolic Intent, no question, adds to the count of those. I'm playing Culling the Weak because again, I think it's just it's so powerful, and it lets you do things that you shouldn't be allowed to do and all that. And so yeah, I mean, I'm with you. I don't think you're qualitatively wrong. I think it's just about sort of how often these scenarios come up, and I could totally imagine that you're right about it. That it comes up often enough that you want that card in your deck because it's so powerful.
Another
cards like Spell Pierce, I think you want to. Again, it's just about having like a sufficient amount of that type of thing, and obviously you already have a lot of it, so you don't. It's not like you're not relying on Spell Pierce the same way you're not relying on Diabolic Intent. So it's like, do I want a little bit more cheap interaction? Or do I want a little bit more of the sort of mid-game, really powerful punch? And you can imagine sort of landing in either spot.
Right. Another secret mode on Diabolic Intent is this deck's primary win condition is Thassa's Oracle, and Esper Sentinel and Kraum are both non-optional draws. If you can force through your consultation and then someone's just like Swords to Plowshares, don't pay the one, you lose. So being able to clear these creatures, if you're under silence, it doesn't matter. But if you're punching through with counter magic, I have found I will go extra steps in my combo to get Kraum out of play. I even had someone in a game recently sort of gasp and mutter something. I had Tymna and Kraum in play during my combo turn, and I Diabolic Intented the Kraum away mid-combo, and someone at the table muttered like, "Oh, sacking the more expensive commander, huh?" Like, right. And the answer is not because I can't count to 5. Like, it's because this has another thing on it that could mess me up. And maybe that's just like neurotically checking boxes, but I mean, some wins will be better protected because you have that line.
A good point. These little things matter. They're good to be aware of, even if you don't optimize your list on them. It's good to be aware of, and they can help break a tie or tip you over the fence. So yeah, that makes sense to me.
Right. And I guess this big package, this is one that we were talking about right up to the last minute. Was you were off Yawgmoth's Will, and I agreed with that. And then you were also off Savine's Reclamation, and I agreed with that until I remembered Intuition was in the deck. And one of the last messages I fired off to you was like, wait, does Intuition even do anything if we don't have the Savine's package? And you're also off Intuition, which is a result of being off Savine's Rec.
Yeah, exactly. We both had to resolve that tension, but we just resolved it in the different ways, right? You put Savine's Reclamation into the deck, where I said, okay, yeah, Intuition can come out. You're right. But I think those can be regarded as a package. And sort of thinking about, also you're thinking about when you're making swaps, you're thinking about the cards that serve a similar function or a different function. And then if I cut Diabolic Intent for Spell Pierce, it's sort of making a statement about wanting or needing less of a certain thing and more of another. Whereas I think the cut for Intuition for Praetor's Grasp, I'm saying, look, that's different. Praetor's Grasp does a good enough intuition impression, and by that I mean I've got a bunch of mana such that I can use a 3 mana kill spell that requires more mana to go into it. And really, like Intuition for Savine's Reclamation, I mean, that's like, I'm almost like not constrained by mana if I'm using that as my win con, right? It's sort of like I'm past the point of being constrained by mana, and it's just about like finding the thing and doing the thing. And I thought Praetor's Grasp was a really good impression of intuition. You just get like the Underworld Breach from someone's deck, and you can tell who has it, right? Or you get the Thassa's Oracle, and you can tell who's got it, and you figure it out. Or if you need interaction, it's not as clean because, of course, like intuition is like you can just I was planning on winning with it, but now, and that's actually how I ended up using intuition more than comboing because it's so expensive to combo with it. I would like use it to get packed, and then someone would use friendly give me the pack, and I have to pay for pack, and it's like whatever. Anyways, Praetor's Grasp can do that too. You can Praetor's Grasp for someone's Fierce Guardianship. Nobody knows what you took until you pass it. It's a little bit less efficient. So it's definitely like it's not doing the intuition thing as well as intuition. Like if I could intuition from a sideboard, I would just play intuition. But the fact that I also had to put Reclamation in my deck, and let's say I've got to cut Phantasmal Image for it. Well, Phantasmal Image was like doing good work for me when I was drawing it, and when I was testing in a different deck slot, right? So if I think about getting to take out Savin's Reclamation for Phantasmal Image is this treat that I unlock by downgrading Intuition for Praetor's Grasp. So there's like a 2-for-2 swap. I'm downgrading in one slot, upgrading the other. But I think Praetor's Grasp plays the Intuition role well enough that it allows me to do it. And drawing Savin's Reclamation was just like, it was just so bricky so many times for me. Like in theory, somebody destroys Lavinia, doesn't exile, and then it has like this extra utility where every now and then I certainly would like get back the Underworld Breach that got countered using it, but that stuff just didn't come up often enough relative to the times where I drew it, wished it was any other card, passed the turn, or just I had a 5-card hand, but because one of them was that, I was missing on either interaction or proactive stuff. That's how that card came out.
Yeah, that all makes sense. I think I'm much higher on the fair grind Savine's Rec. Like we talked about getting back a breach that was countered earlier, but just fighting over Grand Abolisher, letting yourself lose the fight, bringing it back again, and then the turn after that, bringing it back twice. Another thing that is really cool, this is a line that Rebel put on my radar, is just turn 1, fetch land, mana crypt, Savine's Rec your fetch land back, sets up turn 2 Kraum, and it like rampant growth in white. It's not sexy, but that mana, if we're signing up for a 7 to 10 turn game, that land's going to be worth a lot going along. And the Savine's is just chilling there for future considerations. The table has to think about it. I think that's like, I mean, the floor of Savine's is there's no target at all. But just above that floor is rampant growth, which is not something I hate necessarily.
Yeah, again, good to be aware of those modes. I've certainly played more games with those 2 cards than without, and I haven't been like, I've had really good results. I mean, it's not the end of the world to play these cards, so it's close again. Phantasmal Image, I think it's hard to stare at the deck list and know how good that card is because you gotta, what am I copying? It's usually something else on the board. You have obviously other players are offering you more opportunities than you're offering yourself with a card like Phantasmal Image and Commander, and so you have to sort of get some reps in, but also just get some, thinking about in your meta game, like how many dock sides resolve where the game does. And it turned out it's been happening for me like kind of a lot. Someone's turn will involve like dockside wheel, but then the counter war happens at some point, maybe after the wheel or on the whatever. And then it happens enough where you untap and you have that really juicy Phantasmal Image target. It's not the only one out there. I mean, even there are a few commanders that are powerful to copy for 2 mana because someone's decided to invest, 5 or 6 mana into a commander. So, not a card you have to play with, not a card I'm married to, a card that could get cut 5 days from now in my list. But for now, it's sort of I've been rocking and rolling with it. And again, all these cards are just going to be good in different situations, and you have to use your intuition for which situation. Likelihood times impact is going to yield the best reward on average. It's close. And Praetor's Grasp, though, definitely give that one a look if you're someone who's saying like, I share Matt's intuition. I share Matt's intuition about intuition. That wasn't on purpose, but that's the sentence I just crafted. I share Matt's intuition about intuition that it's just it's a little bit awkward that I have to play this other card. And it's expensive anyways. Player's Grasp will give you that expensive card that ends the game a chunk of the time where you just have a lot of mana. So think about that.
Yep, well reasoned. I'm in for it, and I think we incidentally hit these two choices where I like that raw power moment of someone else just had a fight. I want intuition. I want a hard tutor in my hand. I don't want Wear Tear in my hand after 1 and 3 go at it, and I'm about to untap in seat 4. I want to shut the door with one of these things. And there are going to be spots where the cheap interaction is better, and there's going to be spots where the tutor blowout is better. And
I like Wear Tear quite a bit. I like Wear Tear a lot more than Spell Pierce, I think, just because I've blown up a lot of fish, and also like just when you play against stacks, which happens, it's just it's good. It's good value. It's not you want to avoid the temptation to somebody gets a little bit ahead and you try to blow up a Soul Ring like that's not generally the right line of work for this deck. But it's more about those pesky permanents that people just sort of count on sticking around that often do stick around. Whether it's fish, whether it's Rhystic Study, whether it's something else that in the particular game state, like a Carpet of Flowers or something. I mean, there are situations enough where enchantments are pesky, and then the other cards you've chosen as interactive that interact with the board, typically they aren't great at interacting with those. So having a variety, it makes your tutors better, but also just it makes draw 4 cards better when you're drawing to reel out to get that rule of law off the table. Your raw count on number of cards that will do that, it can be dramatically impacted by even a couple cards like Wear and Tear or like Cyclonic Grip, which we both opted to play Cyclonic Grip. I know other folks may decide to cut it if they're wrong side and think I go so fast, I'm never going to overload this thing. Well, I would think twice about that kind of thing because you want that flexible answer. And like one Chain of Vapor, it just doesn't cut it because it's just so hard to find in a 100-card deck. But obviously, you got to give up something to get it. So it's not free playing Wear Tear. You got to cut a card like Diabolic Intent. You're going to be unhappy some of the time, no question.
Yeah, Wear Tear and Phantasmal Image are much more interesting to me than Spell Pierce is. Like, Spell Pierce is, I don't know, like the 6th, 7th, 8th version of this, and Phantasmal Image is the first version of this. Image could also be Gilded Drake. I've seen that in lists that does a similar thing. Wear Tear I'm very excited about. I think that's super cool. You're also just -1 land overall from me. Like I could cut the City of Traders for one of these spells, try them out. That's probably where I'm going to go next.
Yeah, and it's perfectly reasonable to. I mean, I've had someone tell me I have to go 1 land deeper, 1 land lower. I don't know about that, but I've also had people say, well, if you want to play the number of lands I have, maybe you ought to get the blue-white talisman in there as sort of an offset. I mean, like, those are reasonable things. Like I haven't played enough games to know the land count and the talisman count. Like, hey, look, I can't hit that like a bullseye on a dartboard. So I think if somebody thinks I'm light by a land, like try an extra land, and no offense taken.
Yeah, I'd rather hit all my land drops and flood a little than be a non-player in a game because I'm screwed. That's just the way I hedge if I'm not sure. And like you said, I didn't Frank Karsten this out. I just went off my own intuition and eyeball in the games I've played and decided I wanted the 28th land and I wanted it to be one that taps for 2 in this particular case.
A note on non-games. I mean, I think folks coming from 60-card competitive like us are naturally going to be more interested in like mulliganing mediocre hands and making sure that they're starting the game on the right foot, even if it's with 5 cards or 6 cards. That like if you're coming from a more casual context, you have to rid yourself of like any kind of petrifying fear of starting with only 6 or 5 cards. And then the other thing is also like you have a lot of information when you're mulliganing by virtue of the fact that you can see what commanders people are playing, which tells you what archetypes they're playing most of the time. And I think the good players, the good cEDH players, whether they're whether they got good in cEDH or got good somewhere else, you're going to really use that information to make really informed decisions. Okay, does this hand actually play out well going 3rd in this pod? I might answer that differently than I would in a different pod. I'm sure, so I'm confident that players like you who have had success at cEDH, like I know that that's what's on your radar, but I think for some of your viewers and listeners, it might not be as much on their radar, and just like we're not going to really be able to overstate how important that can be, starting off a game on the right foot that way.
Yeah, one of the first things that I really got beat out of me when I started jumping into Discord games playing cEDH was you can't keep lands and spells. Like Legacy is my main format. I play a lot of Modern as well, and then have experience in basically all of them. But I'm like a lands and spells kind of guy. Like even like 6 lands a row, let's do it in certain Legacy matchups, or like 5 lands Lightning Bolt Expressive Iteration. Yeah, come on. But you can't keep hands like this. I mulliganed so many reasonable looking lands and spell hands in this tournament, and another shout out to Dan, moderately anonymous, who on stream against them, they'll just like go to 3 in 4th position until they have Rhystic Study, and then they win the game. And that's pretty aggressive take on that, but it's closer to correct than just keep your first 7 that has lands and spells in it.
Right. Yeah, I don't know how extreme you want to take it. Maybe it depends on your deck's overall strategy, but I think the key for somebody who's a little bit less advanced or just wants to improve at that is, I think, again, thinking really concretely about how the first few turns are going to play out is going to really help you. So not just like, does this hand look reasonable, or not just like thinking in a binary sense, is this a keep? Is this a mulligan? You know, if I post this to the Discord that I'm in with no context, are people going to shout keep at me or shout mulligan at me? Like that's not going to be as precise as you need to be. You have to think about at this table, am I going to be behind by a lot unless I draw the perfect card? Then I got to mulligan that hand, right? Or is this hand going to be, at least it gets my mana where it needs to be, so that I only need to, there's a lot of different things I could draw to use that mana on, and okay, maybe I'll take a chance on this at this table. Anyways, like that stuff becomes really important, and if you're struggling with that, I mean, that is a place where you can get the help of other folks. So yeah, write down those decisions, but also keep the context when you ask somebody, hey, would you keep this or not? Explain sort of like how you're thinking about it. What else is going on at the table, so that where are you in the turn order? Things that like matter a ton that maybe don't show up in like more rudimentary exercises about sort of keep and roll.
Yep, absolutely. The turn order part, like the lands and spells, was the first part of the harsh lessons I learned by doing the wrong thing. Turn order was the other. Being in 4th is just such a different incentive than being in 1st. Like turn 1 Ragavan looks pretty good in 1st position. Might not even get a chance to attack in 4th position. There's a lot going on there that's not there in 60 card formats, and you can't be scared of 5 cards in this format. Just mulligan 4 times until you find a hand that plays, because you're also not 1v1. The rest of the table, like it's a point of politicking. It's just like, I went to 5, I can't help here, and then someone else is going to cast their spell, and now there's 2 spells out of the pool that your opponent has, the one that was cast and the one that countered it, and you're just slowly catching up.
And realizing that you might be playing against a combo deck, but the likelihood that an Elves deck wheels you into a new 7 is very different than the odds that a Rog side deck does that, right? So if you're thinking about mulliganing and perhaps trying to locate a card like Gemstone Caverns or whatever or even just the cost of mulliganing in general in 4th position, it's again different based on what pod you're in, because the more likely your opponents are to wheel early, the less costly it is, because you can sort of sit there and go, okay, they're going to wheel on it doesn't mean you mull the 2 and to count on it, but it just changes the dynamic. It changes the different ways in which you can win a game when you mull the 4. Well, that certainly is one of them. Anyway, so I think, and also like another way is just like having a blue source and a Mystic Remora, and so you think about the fact that like your deck has these powerful things, and these are all reasons to really interrogate those mediocre hands. And I'm sure there's a point too far where you can mulligan too much, but most players intuitively are going to be on the other side of that, because you come from other formats where you're not mulliganing as much.
Yep. Amen to all of that. Never be scared of 5, and turn order matters a lot.
Yeah.
Is there anything else that we haven't touched in the broad strokes here or in the details here? We've been talking for a little over an hour now, and feel like
Yeah,
we've
it's
done a
fun.
lot.
We're having fun with it.
Yeah.
You know, I think I'm not sure whether I'm going to spend a ton of time more on this deck or just sort of switch it up and try something different. I don't know. Maybe I'll do both and sort of switch back and forth. But I think there's like other cards that are worthy of folks considering. I think like Chance for Glory I mentioned, Blue Elemental Blast. I think Voidwalker is a pretty good one-sided bear. I think that card again, Deluge, and I think the Yawgmoth's Will is close. There are a lot of cards that maybe I didn't choose, but just like how when I started out like a couple weeks ago, I was saying like, well, I right now I don't have Imperial Seal in my deck. I'm not sure, but eventually like, okay, Imperial Seal goes back in, and it's not, and I don't have to like, you don't want to set it up so you take an ego hit, every time you do something like that. It's like no. I know I had an argument about it, but the more I thought about it, like I should be playing Imperial Seal, but maybe in this other deck I won't. So anyways, just think about when you're looking at somebody else's deck list, like, and be open-minded like Ryan was, and think about, and remember that a change to your deck it's not a permanent change, and it's not written in stone, and it doesn't go on your, it doesn't go on your permanent record, right? If you're wrong or right about it, whatever. So I think it's just experiment a little bit, and then try to adopt that mindset where it's like, hey, if I learn a little bit from every person I talk to the format, talk about the format with, I'm going to learn a lot really quickly. If I talk to 10 people, I'm going to learn 10 things. Like, that's awesome. So I think the more rigid we are, the harder it is to let that information in. So again, I applaud you for sort of letting some information in. I'm sure I got a couple of things right and a couple of things wrong. And the more you're equipped to borrow from the things I got right and sort of ignore the things I got wrong, better off you're going to be. Yeah, Grim Tutor is one that, just like Praetor's Grasp, has moved up in my estimation, only because like I initially looked at like 3 mana is a lot, but ultimately, like, you want to have a sufficient number of really powerful things. So maybe that could be a card to look at. Anyways, I also think about, last thing I'll say about the way T&K is constructed is just to think about, why are you this archetype and not another archetype will help you identify ways to sort of double down on your strategy and lean into your strengths. So like, why am I T&K instead of Rogside? Or why am I playing this style of deck with Hate Bears instead of just playing Winota, right? I think that helps you too understand. Even though I have Grand Magistrate in my deck, doesn't mean I'm Winota. Well, so what is my game plan? What am I trying to do anyway? So these are all just things that I've found helpful as I've learned about the format and tried to make my deck list a little better every week. These are all different modes of thinking and sort of shortcuts, I think.
I'm gonna stop sharing here, get us back on the screen to sign this off, and yeah, that point is huge. I know the Rogsai Cabal. I think the Cabal are different people than the Rogsai group. I'm not in on all of the community drama, but I think the Cabal is an actual specific group. But the group of people who really went in on Rogsai, they identified that the thing to do in cEDH is resolve ad nauseum, and they made a deck that does the thing the best. But I like Tymna Kraum because that's not the thing; it's a thing, and it's one of the many things you can do. And people need to respect that thing while you draw cards with your other thing and lock them out with your other thing and counter their spells with your other thing. And there's a lot of play style. And in my finals match, I mulliganed to 7 that had Imperial Sealed Arc Ritual, Cabal Ritual. And that's just not what I wanted with 7 cards in 4th position. I mulliganed to a 5 that could accelerate Tymna. And I imagine the Rogsai group would be horrified by that decision, but I mean, I registered Tymna and not Rogsai, so that's a really important lesson. Play to your commander.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, when somebody starts preaching to you about any kind of absolute, like for example, there's no reason to be doing anything other than Rogsai, and I'm not saying that those guys say that all day every day, but if someone says something like that to you, your instinct as a player who wants to learn and improve, to be thinking about the ways in which that might not be true, the situations in which that might be true, or the meta games in which that might not be true, right? And I think that for me, it's become sort of clear that Rogsai might be the best thing to be doing in pods of 4 ad nauseum decks or 3 ad nauseum decks in one stacks, but it might not be the best thing to be doing in more mixed pods where sometimes it's 2 stacks, 2 turbo, or sometimes it's 2 stacks, a homebrew, and a turbo deck, in which case I actually going slower benefits you tremendously because you can actually partner up with other slower decks better to fight through what the stats deck is doing. So, anyways, like just think about the exceptions, right? People in cEDH, it is EDH adjacent, so people are going to love sort of grand proclamations about sort of things that are universally true. You'll notice that I didn't say like Imperial Steel is bad. I didn't say, Lavinia is good in every deck. And there's just because those are going to do me more harm than good. And if you hear somebody saying something like that, again, think about whether that might be false in your context of your deck and why that might be the case. Anyway, these are just like sort of lessons I think that are going to help folks sort through some of the noise and pick out, things that could actually help them win and not just like help them win an argument on the internet.
Yeah, I get immediately suspicious when anyone makes a firm statement about a card to me, like that card is trash, that card is unplayable, this card is the only thing worth doing. Any like really firm 10 or 0 kind of statement about a card. Because I mean, if we're talking about like, some 6-mana draft comment, sure, I agree, it's trash, it's unplayable. But like Professional Facebreaker, that's in Tymna Kraum colors. We have Cavern of Souls now. We're slowing down anyway. Like, I've heard that card called trash, but also now that some incentives have shifted, maybe I want to start breaking faces. That's something kicking around in the back of my head, and I don't know. I want to try it. Maybe it is not where I end up, but it's certainly not trash or unplayable. I've lost a lot of games to cards that are deemed unplayable because once they're in play, doesn't matter what they cost, doesn't matter what the context is. Like, that 6-drop's going to kill you.
I'm thinking the same thing about Orange Champ, and again, like just to be very concrete about it, right? You say like people will tell you that Orange Chant is not the one you want to be playing because Silence like gets the whole table and you can do it on your turn. Everybody's like, how we then that makes me want to think more concretely about how often do I use Silence to stop the person whose turn it is. Because every time I do that, it doesn't really matter whether I have a Silence or an Orange Chant. So let me sort of think about how often that's happening. How often when I'm going off, do I sort of know that it's the one player sitting there with all this interaction I need to stop? And I know it's not going to be as good as Silence, but you also get a little bonus out of being able to stop someone from attacking. People play that Big Bird, Jeskai combo deck that will sometimes just threaten you to attack you for 21 commander damage, and you might have an Orange Chant that might be awesome in that person's upkeep. So again, I want to think I don't want my brain going to Orange Chant bad in cEDH. You know what I mean? I don't want that to be the thought cluster. I want to be thinking more concretely about it. And then I want to reach for that card, maybe because I'm playing fewer colors than I'm playing now. So I have an opportunity to have more space in my deck. And I go, yeah, you know what? A little bit, a Silence, a little bit worse, a little bit different is exactly what I'm looking for. Anyways, so I think we're on the same page about that, but just to instruct the viewers that the exceptions are just as important as the rules. And if you want to really excel, like think about not just why it's mostly bad, but specifically where is this card not going to be bad, and how can I get it into my deck when I'm in that situation.
Yeah, I feel like we could talk for another 6 hours, but I feel like we've done enough for one video. We're an hour 15 into this one, and thanks for everyone for sticking around. I hope this was worth your time. Matt is at Sick of It on the internet. You have anything else you want to plug?
No, just happy to be participating in this community. So I'm hoping to make it up to Silicon Dynasty. If you're thinking about checking out cEDH, have any questions, I'm sure Brian or myself happy to answer them. And if you're not new to the format but you have questions anyways, at Sick of It on Twitter. Not promoting anything right now, but I've been enjoying the conversations I'm having, so happy to have more of those. Just hit me up.
Awesome. And you all know me. You're on my channel right now. Like, comment, and subscribe while you're here. Thanks for sticking out this conversation. It was a good one. And this video, a lot longer than I intended. Between the tournament report went a full hour, and then we just talked for over an hour. I hope this was all good stuff for the people who want to hear it.
Two-parter incoming?
Yep, two-parter.
You got monetized, baby.
I already release every day. There's no more room. YouTube gets mad if you post twice. All right. Now we're just rambling. So we're out of here. Thank you for your time, Matt.
All right. Thanks for having me.